Hi, my name's Paul Doroshenko. I'm one of the BC driving lawyers. I want to talk to you today about the Superintendent of Motor Vehicles, what's also called RoadSafetyBC. So in British Columbia, we have something called the Superintendent of Motor Vehicles. And if you watch the very first video in this series, it talks a little bit about the history, how we ended up with a Superintendent of Motor Vehicles. The Superintendent of Motor Vehicles is a person who's designated by the government, essentially appointed by the government. They have a job, and their job is essentially to come up with regulation of the roads and highways in British Columbia, and in particular licensing. They have a judicial role in that they may be acting as an adjudicator in certain capacities. There's a little bit of an investigatory role in that they may be looking at your driving record and investigating you and your driving record. And then there's also a role to advise government. And finally, there's a role to promote safety on the road. So these are the basic roles of the Superintendent of Motor Vehicles in British Columbia. There's been, just in the last few decades, a number of people who have held the position of Superintendent of Motor Vehicles, and it is a position that is held at the pleasure of the government. So the government may replace the Superintendent of Motor Vehicles for political reasons, but usually it's just an issue of the person has worked in that role for a number of years and it's time to move on. Often the person who holds that capacity as the Superintendent of Motor Vehicles can be a former police officer, it can be somebody who's been in government for a long time and understands the role, the administrative role of government, or somebody who the government looks at and says, look, we've got a political agenda here that we want to advance with the Superintendent of Motor Vehicles, like we saw when the immediate roadside prohibition scheme came out. If you get a letter from the Superintendent of Motor Vehicles, RoadSafetyBC is the other name they call themselves, you better call a lawyer right away, because the letters that come from them have serious consequences for you. You may get a notice of intent to prohibit you from driving. If that's the case, you've only got a short period of time to deal with that. You might get a notice of prohibition from the Superintendent of Motor Vehicles. You can get a warning letter. You can be placed on probation. These are all things that can happen if you're convicted of an offense under the Motor Vehicle Act or the Criminal Code or any other basically driving related offense in British Columbia. If you do get a letter from the superintendent, you feel free to call us. We're the BC Driving Lawyers. Our phone number is 604-608-1200, bcdrivinglawyers.com.